Welcome, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. So please note that American Sign Language, or ASL, is not available for this meeting. However, we offer captions, but you have to enable them on your end. To turn on captions, click the More button or the three dots, depending on your device, and make a caption selection. We are offering Spanish interpretation during today's work group. I'll read the instructions for joining the Spanish interpretation channel in English, and then a Spanish interpreter will read them in Spanish. Simultaneous interpretation is being provided. English speakers may need to select English as their language. So for accessing Zoom from a computer or accessing the interpretation options, click the globe icon located at the bottom of the screen and choose English. From a smartphone, click the three dots above where it says More on the bottom right side of your screen and choose Language Interpretation. Choose English and then press Done on the top right side of the screen.
Muy bien, bienvenidos a todos. Vamos a empezar. Por favor, noten que no contamos con servicios de lengua de señas estadounidense el día de hoy, pero sí estamos ofreciendo servicio de subtitulaje. Se tiene que activar por parte de ustedes. Para poderla activar, tiene que dar clic en el botón que dice más o los 3 puntos que aparecen en el menú de Zoom, dependiendo del dispositivo. También estamos ofreciendo servicios de interpretación al español durante el taller del día de hoy. Para poder accesar, si es en computadora, haga clic en el símbolo de globo terráqueo que aparece también en la parte inferior de la pantalla, o a veces en donde dice más y los 3 puntos, seleccione español y puede también seleccionar la opción de silenciar el audio original para escuchar solamente la voz del intérprete. Si está entrando o conectándose a Zoom por un teléfono inteligente, puede hacer clic en los 3 puntos encima de donde dice más, igualmente en la parte inferior de la parte derecha de la pantalla. Ahí selecciona interpretación, español, y después puede dar clic en finalizar. Gracias.
Okay, thank you. So good morning and thank you for joining today. I think we'll go ahead and get started. So the purpose of today's meeting is to start the conversation and get your feedback on the best approaches to launch a planning and capacity building request for applications with funding CARB was allocated in fiscal year 2023-24. My name is Violet Martin, and I will lead today's discussion, but I want to thank the great CARB team joining me to help make sure all runs smoothly this morning. There's lots of people helping with various tasks. So okay, a few things, details before we get started. Today's meeting, including the agenda and slides, are on our low carbon transportation incentives webpage. Maggie is going to share that link with you in the chat. In about 2 weeks, we will post the recording of today's meeting on this page as well. There are several opportunities built in today's presentation for questions. So during those segments, we ask that you use the raise hand feature in Zoom or press #2 on your phone during Q&A sessions, and Catherine will call on you. You can also email us your questions or comments at cleantransportationincentives@arb.ca.gov. That's cleantransportationincentives@arb.ca.gov, which is also being shared in the chat, and we will try to answer all those questions during this meeting as well. Please ensure your name is visible on Zoom or adjust your phone number to the last 4 digits if calling in. So now let's get in today's agenda. So for today's topics, they include background and the status of planning capacity building funding, both past and current. We'll also talk about lessons learned from last year's request for applications, upcoming RFA details, the application format and draft eligibility requirements. We'll also wrap up and provide some next steps. As I mentioned, there are several points in which we will take questions and comments, and there are also some polls as part of today's discussion, in part so we understand a little bit more about you, but also for you to give some feedback on a few slides that I'm presenting today. If you're unable to participate or use the polling feature, you're also welcome to email us your responses to those questions. And those polls are mainly as we get further into the presentation. So please note that all times are approximate. This meeting is scheduled for about an hour and a half, but if we cover all content sooner and there are no questions, we will conclude early. So let's get started with our first poll. So I will launch that. Okay, so you should see on your screen our first poll questions. We're just trying to get an understanding of what type of organization do you represent. The options are community-based organization, local or regional government, tribal government, school district or local education agency, private mobility or transportation provider, consultant, or other. So please make your selections. And then I'll end the poll and then share the results for you all to get a sense of who's in the room as well as yourself. Okay. I'm gonna stop in just a second here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So as you can see, we have a good number of local or regional government and some community-based organizations. So it's a good mix. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing and move on to, I believe we have another poll. So our second polling question, just curious about where you are within the state. Where's your community located? I realize the map isn't super detailed, but please just make approximations based on where you think you might land, whether it's northern, central, coastal, southern, or if your community is, or you operate at a statewide level, there's that option for you as well. Okay, so I'll keep it up for just a couple more seconds here and then end it. Okay, results. So we got a lot of northern friends joining us today, myself included. I think a lot of CARB might be northern. And then we also have actually a good split between statewide, southern, and central. So, okay, good to know. And sorry, we're not gonna have that many polls, so I know it feels like a lot up front, but I've got one more poll for you right up front, and just generally curious, what brings you here today? Are you interested in applying for a planning grant? Are you curious if planning grants would benefit your community? Are you interested in sharing information about this opportunity with others in your community or across the state? Or just generally interested about learning of CARB funding opportunities? So please make your selection, and then I'll end the poll in just a couple of seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and end that. So we have a lot of folks interested in just generally what our funding opportunities are, but our second most high number is those interested in applying for a planning grant, which is great. Happy to see that. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. So let's get started on some background. So this visual displays our clean mobility investments, which are formally referred to as sustainable community-based transportation equity projects. These include CMO, STEP, clean mobility in schools, and planning. Clean mobility options, or CMO, are small-scale shared mobility projects and community transportation needs assessments. Sustainable Transportation Equity Project, or STEP, include multifaceted clean transportation and supporting projects to address community transportation needs and reduce vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. Clean mobility in schools entails clean transportation and education projects at K through 12 public schools. We also noted on the right the regional clean mobility projects, which were the first early pilots that provided shared mobility services. These include projects such as Blue LA and our community car share, as well as many others. And last but certainly not least, planning and capacity building, or just planning for short, which are community-led planning capacity building projects and dedicated localized technical assistance and outreach. For today, the remainder of the presentation is focused on planning, but in case you're interested in more details for any one of these projects, we'll share a link for you in the chat. Okay, so we have another poll. This is, we're just generally curious, which projects you may have applied for previously in the past. So please let us know if you've applied for any one of these, Clean Mobility in Schools, or CMIS, Clean Mobility Options, or CMO, Planning and Capacity Building, and STEP, or you also can select if you've applied for multiple programs or projects in the past. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end this poll now. And as you can see, the vast number here have not applied for a project in the past. So hopefully that means that you're hearing about this for the first time and interested in seeing whether or not this is an opportunity that could benefit your community. So need to see that. Okay. Okay. So planning and capacity building has been an integral element for several of our mobility investments since 2019. In the first solicitation of STEP, CARB awarded $1.7 million in planning and capacity building grants to 8 California nonprofits, local governments, and transit agencies. During the first funding window, Clean Mobility Options awarded $1.15 million in community transportation needs assessment vouchers to 24 California nonprofits, local governments, transit agencies, and Native American tribes. And $2 million was awarded to 6 community-based and grassroots level organizations to conduct clean transportation outreach and become formal outreach partners through Access Clean California. So by, next slide, please. By piloting different approaches to support capacity building and planning, we soon realized that more dedicated resources toward early project support was a critical need, especially for efforts led by community-based organizations. Based on feedback from grantees of needs assessments or planning capacity building projects during their implementation, we also saw the need for dedicated resources more specific for these types of efforts. This need was also identified in the independent evaluation conducted by the Othering and Belonging Institute within UC Berkeley, which was to assess the varying planning approaches offered through CMO and STEP. The expanded resource recommendations included providing more practical tools to conduct needs assessments, early project support that helps connect you and build strong relationships between local partners, increased project funding, connections to varied funding opportunities, help for organizations develop institutional capacity for equity and diversity work. CARB responded to this feedback by expanding funding and a dedicated funding category under the Clean Mobility Investment umbrella. This paves the way for the suggested resources, but also allows a more diverse set of planning capacity building projects focused on transportation equity. In last year's request for applications for planning, clean mobility in schools, and STEP, we worked with the public to develop an understanding of transportation equity and collectively came up with transportation equity occurs when the transportation system addresses unique transportation barriers by improving the quality of life of low-income communities and communities disproportionately impacted by air pollution or who lack access to housing, jobs, and services. With this at the forefront, planning helps achieve transportation equity by improving local understanding of residents' transportation needs, preparing communities to implement clean transportation and land use projects, and develop a foundation for organizational and community capacity building. In fiscal year 22-23, CARB allocated $1.2 million for 12 community transportation needs assessments through CMO. And the same year, we also began a dedicated planning capacity building funding opportunity with an initial $5 million. CARB released a joint competitive request for applications, or RFA, for planning, clean mobility in schools and STEP applications, in which CARB awarded 7 planning grants. At the same time, CARB released a competitive solicitation for a statewide planning capacity building project administrator to oversee the planning grants and provide implementation support to the planning, CMIS, and STEP grants selected from the 22-23 joint RFA. Data for Social Good was selected to administer the $5 million, 3.1 million of which is allotted toward the 7 planning grants that I just mentioned, and the remaining is intended for the administrator's implementation activities, consisting of capacity building, administrative, and project implementation support to all the planning, clean mobility in schools, and STEP awardees, as well as their partners. So in fiscal year 23-24, CARB allocated an additional $10 million in planning capacity building funding to support dedicated outreach and community capacity building, as well as workforce training and development and other critical communities. The $10 million will support a new request for applications for 15 plus projects. So about 200 was used to fully fund a project from the last RFA, and up to 2.4 million for the statewide administrator to oversee the new projects and provide outreach and direct application support. So the 10 million is the subject of today's discussion, and I'll get into the details in a few slides here. We also have a link to our planning capacity building webpage with these numbers and more background details for you. So we'll drop that in the chat. The statewide planning capacity building administrator team that is overseeing the $5 million from fiscal year 22-23 and the $10 million from the 23-24 funding is led by Data for Social Good in partnership with Momentum and Institute for Sustainable Communities. This team is providing the planning, CMIS, and STEP projects selected from last year's RFA implementation support. This involves working with each project team to develop tools, resources, trainings, and so on. And this is all based on project needs. So the goal is to support them in ways that their projects can be implemented successfully. This may include help identifying and building strategic partnerships with government and community-based organizations, access to a technical team to help with aspects related to purchasing or permitting, along with administrative support to simplify some of the processes and paperwork that come with implementing a grant. It also means leveraging the Clean Mobility Equity Alliance. For those of you interested in a list and more details on the projects that CARB selected during last year's RFA, Maggie will share that link with you in the chat to the project summaries. Okay. So last year's RFA was very effective, and we received a lot of positive feedback about the overall process. The concept phase of the application was oversubscribed by over 6 times the available funding. Still, there are opportunities for improvement. So based on feedback from the technical assistance team led by the Institute for Local Government and responses to surveys from the applicant pool, or those that reached out for technical assistance, we received a lot of helpful tips to improve future RFAs and guide this upcoming planning RFA. These lessons include begin outreach and applicant support early, particularly to support rural organizations and tribal governments, improve application support to include partnership building opportunities, and tailored to applicants with the greatest need. Simplify the 2-phased application approach, give applicants more time to complete the application, especially the full phase. Work with communities to make sure eligibility requirements are feasible for lower capacity organizations. And the idea behind this is to make it possible for under-resourced communities to apply or continue providing extra points to priority lead applicants. Also, updating questions to allow for more flexibility in the application and acknowledge that not all details will be fully figured out, especially if the goal of the project is to build networks or partnerships and so on. So public feedback will help shape many of the particulars, but the basic building blocks of the upcoming planning RFA include, we have 7.3 million available for community-led planning projects. We received a lot of feedback last year in support of a $500,000 project cap, which means we can fund 15 projects or more if the average funding request is less per project. Outreach focusing on priority populations will be conducted in advance of the RFA release, and community support, including direct application assistance, will be offered. So this slide outlines the anticipated timeline. This is our first work group. More is possible based on public feedback, but we do not have anything scheduled as of yet. So for right now, we have in the November timeframe, we plan to release some draft eligibility requirements, which will be shaped further based off of our discussion today. And then from this point through January, that will mark the outreach and public comment period. We do plan to release the RFA in early 2025 and making project selections by around July. All this, of course, is tentative and really based on many factors, including the application format, which we'll discuss today. Before we open to some comments and questions, I wanted to share a very brief description of some roles for the upcoming RFA. CARB will lead all public work groups to discuss the application format, guidelines, and eligibility requirements. We will also develop and post all the RFA application materials, guided by feedback, public feedback, of course, and then make project selections based on criteria that will also be provided in the final materials. The Planning and Capacity Building Administrator team will lead outreach focusing on rural, tribal, and other priority groups. They will also be supporting potential applicants with navigating the application, the requirements, and other direct application functions. So after projects are selected, the administrator team will then work with organizations to develop grant agreements and then administer the grants and provide tailored support as they are being implemented. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. So Catherine, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Violet. So if you have a question or a comment, we're going to ask you to raise your hand in the Zoom. For those of you who might be calling in by phone, you can dial #2, also known as #2. If you're on Zoom, the react button at the bottom with the little heart has a raised hand option once you click on it. Once you're called on, we're going to ask you to please state your name and affiliation before you ask a question or make a comment, just for the public record. And if you prefer not to speak, you can email questions to the Clean Transportation Incentives at arb.ca.gov email, and that'll be dropped in the chat. So again, that's Clean Transportation Incentives at arb.ca.gov. So that inbox is being monitored in real time. So if we see any comments or questions come through there, we'll be able to read those out loud and respond. So I'm going to cycle through raised hands and emailed questions, so you'll get a chance to ask your question no matter what. So with that, if there are any hands raised, I'll call on you briefly. Don't see any just yet, but we'll give it a minute.
No questions in email at this time either, Catherine.
Thanks, Maggie. Still no raised hands. Oh, I do see a raised hand. Never mind. Robert, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Robert Smith, Contra Costa County. I was just going to ask if we go back to the previous slide with the schedule. I missed that. So thank you.
These slides are also posted online. So if that's helpful to you, you can go ahead and access them there or save them for another time to review.
Do you have a follow-up question to ask, Robert, or you just want to see the slide?
Just wanted to see the slide. So thank you. And I'll refer to the material on the website. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I see we have another hand raised. Javier?
Hi there. Yeah, I was, and thanks for coming back to this slide, because it was actually my questions referring to this one. But when do you anticipate so you mentioned that you're expecting to release the guidelines and the application in January. When do you anticipate the deadline to be for those submissions?
I think at this point, it might be more likely early February, but we'll keep everyone posted on what the exact timeline is. So I think the answer to your question will depend on a number of factors that we'll be discussing in some subsequent slides. We're trying to get feedback today on the application format. And we are proposing that at minimum, we'd have an 8-week application period. So again, that may depend on if there's a 2-phased application approach, then it would probably be slightly longer. But it can go a number of ways. So that's one area we're certainly looking for some feedback on. And like I said, I have a couple of slides that will address that, and we can see what you think on some initial ideas that we have. And then if there's anything that seems, like we should further refine, then we can see what you think there.
Maggie, any questions? Okay, I see no more questions in the email. I think we might be able to move on to the next part of the presentation. There will be other options for questions later on.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Okay, so this may very well be the part you're most interested in. So we're curious about your ideas around the most appropriate application format for the upcoming planning RFA. For some context, CARB is considering new application approaches to the 2-phased approach piloted last year. So last year was an initial written concept application or concept phase, and then projects that scored 70 or more on their application were then invited to complete a full application. The concept phase required a minimal amount of information, but it was helpful for some organizations to make sure that the types of projects they wanted to get funding met the goals of our program. But we also recognize that maybe for planning, this 2-phased approach could be refined to better support lower capacity organizations that do not have the time or resources to complete a written application in 2 parts. For example, we could release an RFA with a single-phase written application only. This would also reduce the overall RFA timeline. CARB heard a lot of feedback in our debriefs from applicants that did not move on to the full phase. That gave us a different perspective on their applications, often revealing details that would have positively benefited applicants. So these details, they didn't make it on paper. So we're wondering if building in an interview or presentation component could help applicants. In addition to tweaking the application format, we plan on extending the application deadline from 6 to 8 weeks or possibly more. So this is the part where we're looking for that feedback. What do you think? So I have a couple of polls that you're welcome to participate in, and then we also can open it up to some of your specific feedback if you have any at this time. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch our 5th poll. Okay, so this is a poll asking, what application format do you prefer? A single-phase written application only, a 2-phased application in which there's a phase 1 for written component, and then a phase 2 where you can present or interview with a project team or some variation of that. There's also the option that, our previous approach was great, phase 1 concept and a phase 2 full application where there is, it's written only, or maybe you have some other ideas that we aren't sharing.
Violet, I think your audio may be out. Is anybody else having that experience?
Yeah, Violet, your audio cut out. Maybe switch your audio device.
So while we're waiting, we'll just continue to collect poll responses here. Still no audio from you, Violet. No. Thanks everyone for your patience. We always have a good time with technical difficulties on Zoom, right?
It looks like the polling is slowed down. Can we share what the results are?
Yeah, are folks able to see? Because I actually, and it might be because of my permissions that I can see them. Do other participants, Adelina, you don't see the poll results?
They have, whoever's in charge of the poll has not stopped
Shared
sharing.
it? Okay.
Let me see if I can.
I can stop sharing. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now,
Yes.
Violet.
Okay,
Yay.
great.
Violet.
Okay, sorry about
Welcome
that.
back.
Lovely. Okay, gotta love Zoom. Okay, so I think there's one more poll here to launch to get some feedback on the timeline. So I'm gonna go ahead and, or is that, yeah, okay, so poll 6. And so this is a question about the length of the application window. So I had mentioned 8 weeks is what our initial idea is, but I also have options here for 10 weeks, 12 weeks, or if there's some other time frame that makes more sense or is appropriate for this type of application or this type of project. Okay, so we've got quite a few responses still coming through. So I'm gonna give it a second. Okay, I will go ahead and end it now, and then I'll share the results. So this is kind of split, but we do have an interest in at least 12 weeks. So 12 weeks is the majority. So that's good feedback. Appreciate your thoughts there. So I think we're on to our next comment and question segment. So this is where you're free to share any of your thoughts on those that submitted other, if there's some other ideas that you want to propose, or if you have any other comments or questions. So I'll hand it off to Catherine.
So y'all know the drill at this point, but please raise your hand if you have a comment or a question. That's the react button, then raise hands at the bottom of the Zoom. And to raise your hand by phone, that's #2 or #2. And please state your name and affiliation if you do have a comment or a question. You can also email questions to the Clean Transportation Incentives at arb.ca.gov email, which is in the chat. And that'll be monitored in real time. I think maybe we'll go to see if the inbox has any questions first this time.
No questions at this time.
Thank you, Maggie. Seeing any raised hands just yet, but you know, folks sometimes need a minute to formulate your thoughts since it's always a lot of information.
Still no emails.
Does anybody who responded to any of the polls want to extrapolate on your response? All right, silence means move on. So I'll pass it back over to you, Violet.
Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to some of the draft eligibility requirements, project types, application sections, and then some scoring and selection, details about the scoring and selection process. So these are all building off of last year's RFA, but I'll emphasize key differences, if any, that are being proposed. So we'll drop last year's RFA webpage into the chat. I highly recommend that if you visit the planning specific materials, it'll give you a better sense of the requirements that we're building off of. This webpage that we're dropping into the chat also contains more details that you may find helpful. So the three main requirements that we're proposing to carry over include at least 50% of the project area is in disadvantaged or low-income community census tracts. This is per Cal Enviroscreen 4.0, and we'll share that link in the chat for you to review some maps and other details about what that means. Eligible lead applicants include community-based organizations, local government, and tribal governments. And projects must consist of a partnership structure. So partnerships between groups implementing specific project tasks and stakeholders with different skill sets and expertise. The main goal of eligible projects is that they increase transportation equity, support GHG emissions and reductions, identify or address a community or school transportation need, support increased access to key destinations and services, and build organization and community capacity to prepare for and implement clean transportation solutions. So this slide contains examples, but it's not an exhaustive list of project types. So some examples include under the clean transportation outreach and engagement and capacity building category, this may be a transportation needs assessment. For land use or for clean transportation equity plans, this can include feasibility studies. And then for workforce training and development, this could be on the job training for clean transportation staff. A more complete list is available in last year's planning RFA. I think this time we can share the main RFA document link and then the eligible projects start on page 15. Again, this is last year's materials, but it's helpful to consult to understand more of of these examples. So the last detail I want to mention here is that an applicant can request up to 500,000 and include multiple project categories or types in their application. So it could be a couple of things that you're trying to move forward within your community. It doesn't have to be just a transportation needs assessment or a feasibility study. Okay, so this is a list of potential application sections, which includes project community, which would be a detailed description and map, applicants and partnership structure, project description and transportation equity, letters of commitment and support for which we're open to further streamlining. For example, accepting one signed letter from community partners and individual letters from sub-applicants so that they can also provide details about their specific role in the effort. Scope and timeline, a detailed budget. So we are going to update the template. We got a lot of feedback last year that this template was a bit complex. Also, project benefit details, outreach and engagement, data collection, evaluation, and reporting, and then long-term sustainability, which in the case of planning speaks to how the effort continues beyond the grant term, such as updating resources being developed or sustaining partnerships, things like that. Some of the general scoring and selection details include the following. CARB will select a team to review and score applications based on specific criteria, which we will release as part of the RFA. Applicants must meet eligibility requirements to be scored. To signal some of our priorities for this funding, we're proposing extra points for projects. So this is where the lead applicant is a tribal government or a community-based organization. The project's located in a rural community and where the community has not received clean mobility investment or planning funds before. CARB will select the highest scored applications until all available funds are awarded. And so with that, we'd like to take your comments and questions. So are there any specific proposed eligibility requirements, project types, application sections, or is there anything about the scoring and selection process that you think should be further refined? Or if you have additional ideas or suggestions. So I'll hand things off to Catherine.
Thank you. And as before, we'll just go through raised hands in the Zoom and any questions through the clean transportation incentives inbox. I see a raised hand from Javier.
Hi there. Thanks again. Yeah, I was looking at the list of eligible projects, recognizing that it is last year's, but specifically wanted to request because it seems like it might fall between a number of these different bullet points here. But and just to provide a little bit of context, in our city, we've already developed a master plan for bicycling and walking. We developed some multimodal plans. We have a light rail project coming into our city. So we're doing a lot of the things that help us get to the goals outlined in this grant program. But all of those things necessitate now updating comprehensively our general plan, specifically the transportation, mobility, or circulation element. But I don't see that outlined or in the bullet point, and I think that would be very important to incorporate as it is the most guiding document for us at the local level.
That's great feedback. I think there are in the materials that we posted, there is some additional specific projects that may sort of address that. But I will make sure that we call that out specifically, because I think our goal would be to help move forward, those updates, especially if that means that there'll be, robust community engagement and outreach surrounding those updates to ensure that those that are often excluded from planning processes have a voice in the transportation components of those general plans. So I think that is definitely an area we can support with this upcoming RFA. Thank you for that feedback, for sure. And I do want to mention this is technically our, we're going pretty quickly through this. We went through pretty much the whole presentation. So this is our last comment and question segment. So please, if you have any thoughts or ideas, that's what we're here for.
See Paula next.
Hello, hi, good morning. I'm Paula Carvajal Paez and I'm with LA Metro. I have a question regarding the community-based organizations. We at Metro are establishing a process for working with CBOs more directly. But we're still going through that process, and when some of the hurdles that we've come across are vetting CBOs in terms of their representation of certain communities and making sure that we're working with CBOs that can represent the communities that we need to plan for or engage with. And then the other hurdle that we've come across is providing funding to CBOs, because CBOs are, for Metro, we're a big agency. We do, I would say millions of dollars of contracts every year through our procurement process. But CBOs are not part of that process. And so we're still trying to figure out how to make payment in a more direct way. A lot of times we work with our vendors to provide payment to CBOs. But if, for example, the requirements of the application moving forward is that we partner with CBOs, it's a relationship that we need to figure out how to streamline from an agency perspective, but then also ensure that we're able to work with CBOs and actually execute the project that that the agency would want to move forward with. And so I don't know if you're also going to provide any guidelines for working with CBOs or help address some of those issues.
Yeah, I think for I guess it depends, because, when submitting an application, we are trying to identify projects where, there is connections to CBOs already made. But I understand the dilemma that, that's would be your focus, is identifying CBOs that you could build partnerships with and have a long-term, have like long-term social infrastructure built out around for your community. So we have previous guidance that we've posted on, some ideal, or not, I shouldn't say ideal, but more approaches that have worked well in the past with partnerships. So there is some on that webpage that we shared that has our last RFA, there's application guidance that's posted. If you scroll to the bottom, there's some guidance there on some of the partnership structure ideas that we shared last year. But I think one of the things that will help support planning efforts as they're implementing their projects. So it's, if this is more of an implementation question, we will have a lot of resources that get developed, especially based on the needs of each project. So if guidance on identifying the right organizations, or the organizations that have good connections with the people that, generally haven't been well represented in your past efforts, help with that is definitely something that, will be part of the implementation support component. For the application, though, we will, I think that is one thing that was identified for, as part of the application support, is networking and partnership building opportunities to maybe identify partners early on as you're developing the application. So I think that, on both fronts, we want to support those pieces and those important components, and, make it to where you have some communities or community-based organizations identified at the time of application, and then you can continue to foster those relationships and add more to that. I hope that answers your question, but I think generally speaking, with planning capacity building, it's about building organizational capacity to make these connections. So that's what we're hoping to help facilitate, especially, emphasizing the clean transportation component. So to the extent that it relates to clean transportation.
Want to highlight for those who are maybe not looking at the chat, there are a bunch of helpful links that have just been dropped in there with guidance to previous year resources and other information that you might want to look into if you have questions along those same lines. At this point, Maggie, are there any questions in the Clean Transportation Incentives inbox?
No questions in the email inbox.
Awesome. And we have another hand raised from Marianne. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Marianne Bithell. I'm with Redwood Coast Energy Authority in Humboldt County. And my question is, in regards to the eligibility, I'm wondering if you might also consider AB 1550, because our community up here in Humboldt doesn't qualify on CalEnviroScreen, but we do have communities that qualify through AB 1550 on the California Climate Investments Priority Populations map. So I just wanted to put that out there, because we are a rural community and we do have CBOs and local stakeholders and local governments that are working towards all kinds of transportation solutions and would be interested in applying for the planning dollars. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne, for that feedback. I'm hoping that I'm correct on this, but I believe AB 1550 is low-income community designations. Is that right? I'm sorry, I'm drawing a bit of a blank.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. That project community is already included in our eligibility. So it's low-income or disadvantaged communities. I believe that low-income may have been incorporated into CalEnviroScreen 4.0. So it includes both communities, but either way, that is eligible. That is one of the priority community or groups that we want to make sure have access to this funding. So that should very well, but I'll follow up with you after the meeting to make sure that I've given you accurate information. It is absolutely included, the low income component. I'm not sure about whether or not that's part of CalEnviroScreen 4.0. So if there's anyone who's very sure about that on the line, please let me know.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. But yes, that is a very important component that we want to make sure that this is eligible to communities, especially in Northern California, where that may be how they're able to access funds to promote clean transportation efforts.
Do we have any other comments or questions on anything that you've seen thus far in the room? I'll also say that if you are still formulating your feedback or have any questions that just haven't quite coalesced yet, you can email questions to that inbox that's on the screen, cleantransportationincentives@arb.ca.gov. I don't know how many times I've said that today, but we'll look at those after the fact and make sure that you get an answer or that your feedback's taken into the record. Seeing none in the room.
Okay, well, maybe we'll see if any questions pop up while I'm sharing some next steps. And I'm absolutely willing to hear any ideas or suggestions at that time if there's a few questions that emerge. So before we conclude today's work group, I do want to share a few additional details. So you're welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions or suggestions for the topics we discussed or anything planning capacity building related. My email address is violet.martin@arb.ca.gov, and we'll drop that email in the chat for you. And then we are hoping to post the recording of today's work group around November 13th. So generally within a few weeks, we're able to get that up for you. We also plan to post the draft guidelines in November for public comment. So that will mirror some feedback we received today, but also give you another opportunity to weigh in if you have some questions or ideas. We also recommend that you subscribe to the Clean and Sustainable Mobility Options listserv. So we'll drop the link of the listserv in the chat for you. By subscribing, you'll receive a notice when we post draft materials, hold additional work groups, and post final materials. And once you click on this link from your device, you'll select subscription type, and that's either email or text. And then you provide your email address or wireless number and select submit. So on the screen that follows, you'll see subscription topics. And about 4 topics down, you'll see clean transportation incentives. And then the clean and sustainable mobility options is the first option under this topic. So we appreciate you joining us today. We know you have very busy schedules, so it's really important that we value your time and appreciate all the feedback that you have. But there's multiple ways for you to share additional ideas. So this is not the only opportunity. You can email me. You can also email our Clean Incentives email inbox that we put in the chat a few times for you. So with that, I'm going to open up one last time if there are any questions, comments, or anything that you wanted to share with us regarding planning capacity building. And if there are no questions, then we will be concluding, I guess, very early. Kind of figured this would only take about an hour, so. Well, going once. Okay, well, we again thank you for your time and have a wonderful morning, rest of your morning and afternoon. Thank you.